Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be reviewing some of our conversation on the spider's thread in anticipation of your final essay. This video is going to cover much of the material that we did in class several weeks ago, and I'm going to post this as a resource for you as you think about your final essays. Most of you have chosen to write on the spider's thread, trying to answer the question, how does the spider's thread convey that hope is precious but easily lost? Remember that in an essay, you have your thesis, which will be, in this case, the spider's thread shows that hope is precious but easily lost. And then your main ideas are parts of the story or things from the story that you can discuss that will prove that thesis. So you could discuss, for instance, the characterization of Kandata, or Kandata's story as he loses hope, or the setting of the story, or the symbol of the spider's thread. This video is going to break down some of these techniques and talk about how the story conveys its themes. Remember that when you're writing an essay, you must make sure that you support your points with quotations. It's not enough to say something about the story. You have to prove it. So let's say you make an argument about a character. You want to say that a character feels something or believes something. It's not enough to simply say that the character does. You have to use a quotation that you'll analyze and discuss in order to prove it. One of the main themes of this story, one of the main arguments, morals, or messages of this story is that hope is the most precious thing in the world. Now, if you wanted to look at Kandata's character and the way in which his character reveals that to be true, you can look at what happens to him in the story. We know that he's suffering in hell, and he gets the chance, or he hopes to escape hell when he sees the spider's thread. If you were going to claim that Kandata feels hope, or that hope is the most precious thing for Kandata, you would need to find a quotation, a line from the story that you could use to show that to be the case. Let's take a look at a part of the story, a quotation that we could analyze to show that. Here, in section 2 of the story on page 39, Kandata is described floating in the pool of blood in hell. And Akutagawa writes in this section, yes, indeed, raising his head, Kandata chanced to look up towards the sky above the pond of blood, and saw the gleaming silver spider thread, so slender and delicate, slipping stealthily down through the silent darkness from the high, high heavens, coming straight for him. Kandata clapped his hands in joy. If only he could take hold of this thread and climb up and up, he could probably escape from hell. Now, if we took a part of that section of the text, we could use it to prove that, for Kandata, hope is the most precious thing. You could discuss how he's sitting in hell, he is hopeless, he's suffering, he's miserable, but here he experiences joy for the first time since he ended up in hell when he sees the spider's thread, the only chance that he has to escape hell. The thing that brings light and joy into his miserable existence is the hope of escaping. And so for Kandata, hope is the most precious thing in the world. There's nothing in this moment that's more valuable to him, because in this moment, the only thing that causes him to clasp his hands together in joy is the sight of the spider's thread, is the feeling of hope that he has. So we can analyze Kandata's behavior, what the story says about him in this moment, to prove that for him, hope is the most precious thing. If we had a paragraph on Kandata's characterization or his desire to escape hell, revealing that hope is precious but easily lost, we've proven the first point, that for him, hope is the most precious thing. The next thing that we have to show using his character, then, would be to show that, well, his hope is very easily lost. Let's try to find some other quotations that we could analyze to prove that. On page 40, Kandata looks down and sees the sinners climbing up behind him. Kandata screamed at them, "Listen to me, you sinners, this spider thread is mine. Who said you could climb it? Get off, get off." At that very instant, the spider thread, which until then had been perfectly fine, broke with a snap, just where Kandata was hanging from it. Before he could even cry out, Kandata fell, slicing through the air, spinning like a top, down headfirst in the darkest depths. He has fallen into the darkest depths. His hope is completely gone, and it was lost in an instant. How easy it is to lose hold of the hope that people have in their lives, as we see in Kandata's story. Now, there are many other things that we could say about that quotation, but keep in mind what you're trying to prove. Remember that our argument for, let's say, a paragraph or that main idea has to support the thesis. Our thesis is hope is precious but easily lost. And then in this paragraph or in this main idea that we've been discussing, we said, well, Kandata's characterization, his story, what he learns, what he feels, and how he grows, shows us that hope is precious but easily lost. Here, we've already shown using that first quotation, well, hope is the most precious thing for him. Now we have to show, using a second quotation like this one, that, well, hope is easily lost. And we see that in his story. He falls into the deepest darkness. He loses the hope. It's literally true that he falls into the deepest darkness, but he's also lost the light of hope inside of him because, well, the spider's thread just broke so easily. He lost his hope. If we had another paragraph, another main idea, we could analyze that quotation in a different way. For instance, if we had a completely different essay, and we wanted in a main idea to say that selfishness leads to destruction, well, we'd have a great point that we could raise using that same quotation. We could say, well, Kandata is incredibly selfish when he says, this spider's thread is mine. He received a gift, but he doesn't want to give that gift to others. He didn't deserve a chance to escape hell, but it was given to him by Buddha. But he becomes greedy, and his selfishness and his greed leads the spider's thread to break. And so he's punished justly for his selfishness. That too is a fine interpretation of the quotation. But we have to make sure that our interpretation really fits with what we're trying to prove. For our argument that hope is precious but easily lost, it doesn't matter that Kandata is selfish. That's not what's important for that argument. So make sure that when you look at a quotation and you're trying to analyze it and develop it, you're really proving what you need to prove. You're showing what needs to be proven to prove your argument. Now, Buddha goes through the same process. We said that Buddha has the hope to save Kandata, but in the same way that Kandata loses his hope to escape hell or loses his chance to escape hell, Buddha, well, he loses his hope that he might be able to save Kandata when Kandata falls back into hell. One of the important things that we discussed with the spider's thread was the way in which we could use literary devices like setting and symbolism to develop themes. We're good at looking at the morals of characters' stories, what characters learn, how they grow, how they change, or what they don't learn or they fail to learn, like Kandata. He didn't learn to appreciate a gift he was given. He didn't learn to treasure that hope properly, and he was punished. But we can also look at literary devices like setting, the description of the environment, or symbolism like the spider's thread itself to determine themes. And we're going to do that with both setting and symbolism. In this story, we move through three main settings. We have the setting of heaven at the beginning of the story. Then we go to the setting of hell. And then at the end of the story, we return to the setting of heaven. There are very different feelings created by these settings. The setting of heaven is beautiful and calm and peaceful. The setting of hell is incredibly disturbing and unpleasant. Let's take a quick look at those settings before we return to this question that I have on setting and theme. We can look at the language that the author uses to describe setting to better understand the feelings that the author is trying to create. So, in heaven, It began one day as he, Buddha, was strolling alone in the paradise by the banks of the lotus pond. The blossoms of the pond were like perfect white pearls, and from their golden centers wafted forth a never-ending fragrance, wonderful beyond description. I think it must have been morning in paradise. So heaven is incredibly beautiful. We think about the word like gold. When I think of gold, I think of something precious and beautiful. It shines in the light. There's a never-ending fragrance, wonderful beyond description. It never ends. So the beauty of heaven, that wonderful aroma of flowers, never ends. It's eternal. So we create this sense of eternal, perpetual peace and beauty and calm joy in heaven. Akutagawa contrasts that feeling of joy with the description of hell later on in the next section of the story. In section 2, here with the other sinners at the low point of the lowest hell. So we were in the highest of the high heavens, now we're in the lowest of the lowest hells. Kandata was endlessly floating up and sinking down again in the pond of blood. Think about that line of hell, or that line of the description of the setting in hell. Kandata is floating up and then floating down, and floating up and floating down. It's this pointless, meaningless repetition. Wherever he looked, there was only pitch darkness, and when a faint shape did pierce the shadows, it was the glint of a needle on the horrible mountain of needles, which only heightened his sense of doom. So look at the way in which the author is using setting to create a depressing, unpleasant mood. It's dark, it's black, we can't see anything. Think about the night and darkness. Darkness is fundamentally, inherently frightening for us because we can't see anything. And then he offers us what seems like hope. Oh, sometimes you can see something. But it's the glint of the silver needles on the mountain of needles. So the only light, the only thing that can be seen in hell is actually an implement of torture. It's something that hurts. It's not real light. It's not like the light of the sun. It's the light of torture. The only thing they can see, the only thing that brings light there is pain. That's horrible. So the setting is used to create this very depressing, disturbed, painful feeling. The story returns to the pleasant setting of heaven, and it uses the exact same description as the first paragraph of the story, except for one word. Akutagawa says the lotuses of the lotus pond, however, were unperturbed. They weren't moved or disturbed. They swayed their perfect pearl-white blossoms near the feet of Lord Shakyamuni, and from their golden centers wafted forth each time a never-ending fragrance, wonderful beyond description. I think it must have been close to noon in paradise. The setting moves from being pleasant and calm to horrifying and disturbing. But when the story returns to heaven, the setting is described in almost the exact same way as it was at the beginning of the story. The only change is that it is noon instead of morning. Thus, the setting of the story shows that nothing of importance has really changed. Kandata's life, hope, failure, and suffering have no impact on anything. They're meaningless. What we've just done is analyzed the setting of the story to come up with a theme, that human life is ultimately meaningless. How do we know that? We can analyze those three quotations of setting. The first setting where we see the beauty of heaven, the second quotation where we see the ugliness of hell and all the miserable suffering, the people being tormented in hell, the way in which they're sinking into the pond of blood and drowning but never dying, never finding relief from their pain. And then, in the end, the return to calm and bliss and peace. The setting of heaven, and thus heaven itself, haven't changed at all. It's all exactly the same. So all the misery and suffering in hell, Kandata's desperate hope to escape from hell and his failure to escape from hell, his being condemned to hell again, all of it meant nothing. It didn't change anything. Heaven is exactly the same as it was. So the author is using setting here, how he moves from the pleasant setting of heaven to the miserable setting of hell to the pleasant setting of heaven again that hasn't changed at all. He's using that evolution of setting to show that, well, the suffering, the life and death of these people, they were all meaningless. They didn't change anything. That argument doesn't necessarily fit with hope is precious but easily lost. Maybe you could analyze the setting in that way, but I'd like to take a look at a device that you certainly can examine in terms of that theme. And that is the literary device of symbolism and the symbol of the spider's thread. Remember that a symbol is just an object that represents something else. We have symbols in our daily lives. When you look at a rose, you think of it as a symbol of love. A wedding ring, it's a symbol of connection and devotion. So we have symbols all around us in our daily lives. In a story, a symbol is just an important object that represents a feeling, a theme, a subject, an emotion, an idea. In the spider's thread, we know that the spider's thread itself is probably a symbol because the title indicates to us that the spider's thread must be an important object. And if you see an object that seems important in a story, that characters talk about or that is mentioned many times, it's probably a symbol. The next video that I post is going to go into more depth, more detail about symbolism in the spider's thread.